Hey everyone, it's Tuesday, December 15th, 2020. Welcome to episode 45 of the Ginger and the Beard podcast. I'm AJ, aka The Ginger.
And I'm Reese, aka The Beard. And on this week's show, we are joined by Adam and Jonathan of Capstan Brewing Company in Hampton, Virginia. Thank you guys for joining us. How's it going?
Well, thank you for having us.
We're so glad you guys could join us tonight, and we're excited to learn a little bit more about Capstan Brewing Company. So to get things started, can you guys just introduce yourselves and give us a quick background on Capstan Brewing?
Sure. I'm Jonathan Connolly. I'm the brewmaster here at Capstan.
And I'm Adam Connolly. I'm the general manager at Capstan.
Awesome.
As far as background and stuff, I mean, again, we've been in beer, as far as drinking and home brewing and traveling beer, tourism for many, many years. And that's just kind of our long and winding road kind of wound us up right here.
We're excited to get into it. We got a lot of questions prepared for you guys. So,
yeah, definitely. And so you guys opened in 2018, right?
We did.
Awesome.
Yeah. February 15th, 2018 was this first doors open.
So really close to going on 3 years.
March. So
nice.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations on your own brewery. That's really cool. So I know that people out there are probably curious, because the Beard and I also were quite curious. First looking into you guys, what the heck is a Capstan bar? So we actually did some research and figured it out on our own because we're too curious and couldn't wait. But could you guys tell the people out there what exactly is a Capstan bar, and what was the inspiration with you guys going with that name? Is there any ties? Obviously, Hampton's is a very nautical, sort of location, lots of water on the coast and things like that. But can you give us a little history in that?
Yeah, I mean, we always wanted a nautical theme for the brewery, and originally we were going to be called Blackbeard's Point Brewing Company, which is named after a point of land in downtown Hampton where Blackbeard's severed head was displayed after he was killed.
Wow, that's awesome.
That's metal.
And they brought his head back, and it's sat there on a pole for a while, and long enough to, on a map, it still will say Blackbeard's Point. But when we decided we did a trademark search on the name. Unfortunately, anything involving Blackbeard and beer is trademarked. And we didn't want to get up and running and all of a sudden get a cease and desist and have to fight something in court that we probably, if someone had, better lawyers than we did. I tried to get the name because I found out who owns it. And the guy lives in the Virgin Islands, and I called him on his cell phone, found a number online. I was like, I wonder if this will work. And I talked to him, and nice guy. And he talked to me about his business in the Virgin Islands, and he makes I don't know if they're still in business, but he made a Blackbeard's Ale, and he trademarked that back in the 90s. So he's had it a while. And I can't remember the name.
St. John.
Yeah, it was St. John Brewing Company.
Interesting.
And he told me, what he does, and he wished me lots of luck. But the last thing he said to me, but I own the name. So we went back to the drawing board and, started brainstorming, trying to find, we wanted something to be Hampton. And, Blackbeard's Point would have been so cool because of the history of Blackbeard, Hampton, the point itself. But there really wasn't anything like that. So I had a whole list of names like Marlin Spike, Deadeye, and all of these were taken. And finally, we trademark search Capstan Bar, and nothing involving Capstan or a Capstan bar is trademarked, except we hold that trademark.
Nice.
That way we can, for building a brand, no one can tell us. Well, they can tell us to cease and desist, but we own the name.
Nice.
And furthermore, so yes, kind of cool and available, but it also, is apropos. As you can, I don't know, y'all can see in the background, as part of the logo there, those are the Capstan bars that were would be shipped inside the holes there and needed to be of like strong oak and pushed in unison just to winch that the hawser line there around it, and would either raise or lower, anchor, what haveth you, anything that needed to be like lifted or pulled, that would do it. So it was a fitting insignia for also the backbone of a brewery as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to kind of paint a word picture for the folks who are listening in their cars and not looking at the YouTube video, number one, go check out what a capstan and a capstan bar looks like on Google. It'll be a little easier, but if you can imagine back in the day before they had mechanical winches and things to raise and lower an anchor, multiple crew members would have to gather around this cylindrical sort of, structure with the poles around it, and they would have to walk in unison around this thing to hoist up, heavy objects, like you said, an anchor or whatever needed to be lifted up. So that's where you kind of get the teamwork and integrity and unity and all that stuff. And obviously the strength of the bar itself. So really cool. I'm glad we got that background and cleared that up. So thanks for explaining that.
Kind of gets this was the replacement of the old heave ho that they would have to do on the ships, I think.
I mean, yeah,
do that too.
They had to do that too. But before a capstan, they used a windlass, which was basically a horizontal mounted capstan where the bars were kind of vertical, which is how they would raise the anchor. And that's what it was used for mostly. And these were a design benefit because you could actually make them go through two decks. So you could have two decks of capstan connected by a big pole and have crew members on two decks. Like if you had a ship with a big anchor. So these were considered a technological development that happened probably in the early 18th century. Any ship or boat that has an anchor that's too heavy to hoist, manually, they still have a capstan. They just don't look like this. They're motorized.
Motorized, yeah. You'll
Wisconsin, in Norfolk has capstan.
You'll find this interesting. I actually sailed on the U.S. Coast Guard Eagle. I don't know if you know the Eagle, but I actually was on it for a couple months and had a capstan. So
that was the prize, huh?
Yeah,
the prize, from World War II. Exactly. We got one of Hitler's ships.
My son-in-law active duty Coast Guard. He's stationed in Connecticut now.
Nice.
I did not get to go. The Eagle was here last year, year before. I didn't get to go down there to see it.
Yeah, I was in New London, so I don't know if he's in New London, but that's where I was for a little while there. Nice. That's what's up. Cool. So yeah, I love that little backstory there, keeping with the nautical theme, trying to bring in some historical insights into the bar and get people thinking about things. We've done a little bit of research and see that both of you have very unique backgrounds. Adam, you have an extensive experience in sustainability and environmental sciences. And Jonathan, you have a long history in brewing, but also in archaeology and history. Can you explain to us what led you both back to brewing and running your own business?
I could tell you exactly what it was for me. It was the government shutdown in 2012, 13.
Makes sense.
It was we didn't work for 2 weeks, and we were literally, you filled out paperwork acknowledging that you were not going to probably get paid, and it was like the best 2 weeks of my life. Did whatever I wanted to, and because eventually when I started in field archaeology, and as you become promoted, you get further removed from the resource and don't really work directly with it. And it was at that time that I took notice of the beer scene in Hampton Roads. And it was amazing because I literally had not brewed professionally since 2001, I think. And, and back then, craft beer we didn't even call it. Craft beer wasn't a term. We were microbreweries back then. It was a gimmick, and it was very hard to sell. You really were only going to make it if you were in a large metropolitan area. And just to give you an idea of how different it was, the brewery, the last brewery I worked at before Capstan was in Fresno, California. And so San Francisco is probably the biggest metropolitan city to Fresno, and it's still like two and a half hours away. I could walk down a crowded street in San Francisco and ask 100 people what IPA was. And I bet you maybe 2 would know.
Yeah.
When we opened up the brewery I was working in Fresno, we had an IPA on tap. And on our opening day, I was standing by the bar because I was watching, because we had, the draft system was tricky there. So I was making sure everything was flowing right. People are lining up and they're looking at the chalkboard and they're like, I'll try that IPA or that IPA. And I was like, what are these? I was like, oh, they don't know what India Pale Ale is, IPA. Nowadays, that's different. And that's what I noticed, back then when I had my 2 weeks of leisure. I was just like, man, people are enjoying craft beer. Whereas before it was like, hey, they'd have a couple of pints of your craft beer, maybe. But most people still wanted macro brews.
Right.
And beers that we could never have sold back in the 90s, people loved. And I always felt like when I was started brewing in the 90s, I had missed the first big wave of craft or microbrewing. It had just, I got out of brewing school and that wave was kind of just cresting and crashing on the shore. And a couple years into it, breweries that made great beer were closing down or consolidating, and it just didn't seem like there was a future in it. And then when I, back in 2012, 2013, I was taking notice. I was like, man, this is a whole different market. And that's when I really started thinking about going back into the brewing industry.
Makes sense. Just having one thing lead to another, So, what about you, Adam?
So I guess what Jonathan was the main emphasis for being in the brewing world, home brewing, and then the brewing scene. I also turned officially 21 while he was down in Fresno, and I was at that time up in Olympia, Washington. So I often either Jonathan would come up I-5 or I would go down I-5. We'd have to pass through the 5 hours of Oregon, and which was grand. I mean, we would bring, I would go down south and load up on cases of Bigfoot or Celebration when it was fantastic and not fresh wet hops, the variety of the real deal. And we would almost plan seasonal adventures as far as some certain of our favorite breweries would allow. So for that, I mean, that was where, personally, I was more into the environmental science. As far as evergreen, symbiosis, my main focus was and fungal and algal symbiotic relationships, and as well as botany. So from there, again, it was just more of a fun time on I-5 where we were able to go in every little out there. I mean, it's a different world. I mean, every town, almost like Germany, has their own brewery or whatnot, or going up. Let's go through Grants Pass and then head through, eventually the Siskiyous or something, and you would find just different great breweries, some of which unfortunately aren't even existent anymore, but they literally were the foundation of what was back then. I mean, even Burt Grant's from out of the Yakima Valley, which is to this day one of the best porters we've ever had, no longer exists. But so that was it. I mean, the Western Washington drinking scene, the Eastern Washington growing, the Yakima Valley, the hops. So you had all of the the ingredients. I mean, it was it was something else. I mean, having that college time to kind of zone out and travel around was really like profound as far as like picking the pathway that we have led ourselves on.
Yeah, you guys seem like you're veterans of all of this, kind of just being in that scene before it was a scene, picking up on all of the, all of the knowledge before anyone else really did. It's a shame that it didn't really catch on in America until, late 2005, like post 2005 kind of, because like over in, like Germany and Belgium, you have all these Trappist ales, you have all these flavorful, beers that nobody even knows about. And we even, back then, I think they kind of like mocked America for having like just drinking domestics all the time. There was no flavor. It was like drinking water. So I'm frankly, I'm just happy that it's like we've got this now in America. I'm not like, there's sometimes it goes a little bit too far, so I like when you see, the more traditional stuff where you have, roasted malts, select, yeast and different hop varieties where you get the flavor from that, not so much, like adding syrup or adding some kind of gimmicky stuff to it. And, kind of going on a tangent, I think here, but it seems like that's what you all are doing at your brewery, is kind of sticking to the traditional brewing methods, and so kind of just looking at what you guys have on tap. A lot of other breweries, you have like pepper beers, you got milkshake IPAs, sours, all kinds of other crazy stuff. We looked at your website and it's really just like, looks like old world techniques with modern innovation. So can you help us kind of understand, on like based on what your website says, what do you mean by that? Old world techniques with modern innovations?
When I first started brewing professionally, didn't know how lucky I was to work with some of the people I did. Like now I know a lot of them were pioneers in the industry. My first actual job in the brewing industry was when I was at Siebel Institute of Technology, which is the brewing school in Chicago. And I interned at the Goose Island production facility, which was then independently owned. And they had the production facility as well as the and when I was interning there, they said they need someone to come wash kegs for like 3 hours in the middle of the night. So that was technically my first job. It was washing kegs in the middle of the night, and then going to school the next day or the actual internship. When I was there, I think the Bourbon County Stout was only like 2 years old. It was something new, and they, from what I can remember, were some of the first craft commercial breweries to ever age beer in modern times in a wooden barrel. From then, I got a job working in Alexandria, Virginia, at a brew pub that's now no longer. And that brew pub had been around a couple years, and they were in the process of expanding to a production facility across town. And I took German in high school and community college, so I could kind of converse in it. And they built the production facility we built. They bought a state-of-the-art 20 hectoliter system from Munich. It's called Baraplan. Smart Mouth has a Baraplan system. In fact, when I went in there, I recognized it right away. I was like, oh my, it's the old Baraplan. And the company sent an actual Braumeister from Germany. So someone, we call ourselves brewmasters, but in Germany, this person basically is like the PhD equivalent of a beer, a brewing scientist, where they have the old, trade system there. So you start as an apprentice journeyman, and he was a master, and he was in his 60s. And so I was working at the pub. I was working on a 7-barrel system at the pub. I was the only brewer there. And then I'd go to the production facility, and we did labor, construction labor there. And we were stripping the floors, and the brewmaster there his name was Franz Berg. We probably shouldn't have been working in there. We were not wearing respirators. It was nothing like that. And he was looking pretty sick. So the head brewer, who his name was Brad Wynn, and he worked at Wild Goose before there, which was a great brewery in the Mid-Atlantic. And he came to us from Wild Goose, and he recommended to the owner that Franz go to work at the pub with me while the floors were being chemically treated and sealed. So I'm like the lowest man in the totem pole. I'm 21 years old. I'd gone to brewing school. I'd been 21 for 2 weeks before brewing school started. And I'm working with like this guy who taught at German's Academy in Munich and had been working in the brewing industry since he was 15. And even as bad as my German was, his English was really bad. But but I got to work every day on this little pub system with this, this German, powerhouse brewer. And that was amazing. So I learned a lot of German techniques, brewing techniques from him. And then Brad Wynn, who I mentioned, he had been taught English cellarmanship techniques. So that's your cask conditioned ale. And so he taught me how to do it. And at that time, we were the only place in all of Northern Virginia, DC area that had real ale, cask conditioned ale served out of firkins, which we would tap on the bar with a mallet. Every other Friday was Firkin Friday. So those were, the old school techniques that I was taught. And then when I took the job in California, I was exposed to these beers, West Coast style beers, which were completely new to me. And there's beer styles we were making on the East Coast back then that are literally now extinct. There was an East Coast IPA that was basically it was like an old English IPA, except we used American ingredients. But then and the only time we ever dry hopped anything was in the firkin. You would put hop plugs in the firkin, and that was it. And then I went out to California where the hops were more prevalent, because they're grown on the West Coast. And I was exposed to these just amazingly, to me, hoppy beers. Nowadays, they wouldn't be considered much anything special. But, back then it was a whole different, scene.
On the topic of firkins, real quick, could you just explain for the benefit of anybody listening?
Yeah. So a firkin is a measurement, a beer measurement, and I think I'm remembering right, it's like 10.8 U.S. gallons, and you can have a firkin, a pin firkin, which is almost about 5 gallons, a kilderkin, and a ton, and then there's other measurements like a butt is holds, I don't forget how many gallons of beer, but basically what a firkin is, and firkins and pin firkins are most common because they're manageable, like you can easily lift them up, is it's like nowadays they're made out of metal. They used to be made out of wood, and it's almost like a miniature wooden barrel except made out of metal, where it's got a bung hole in the side and a keystone in the head hole. And what you do is, to try and simplify it, because I could talk on this for a while, is you rack beer into it when it's almost done fermenting. And sometimes you add fining, sometimes you add a hop plug, and you put in a keystone or a shive to close it, and then you hammer in the shive and the keystone to seal it. And then you let it condition for about 2 weeks at room temperature. So the beer finishes in the firkin, and it's all naturally carbonated. And then there's a whole other, process behind, serving it. But it's beer as it had been served for 1,000 years or more, and it's you could serve it like we did, where we'd actually take a mallet and a tap, and you would whack it, and beer would squirt everywhere, and you'd stop it and serve it right out of the firkin or the kilderkin or the pin firkin. Or they have beer engines, but it's not like draft beer where it's carbonated highly. It's like usually maybe 1.3, 1.6 volumes. Most American ales are 2.3 volumes of carbonation. So it's lightly carbonated. The mouthfeel is softer because the bubbles are actually smaller because they're excreted through the yeast. So it gives you like this flavorful, beer that tastes like as it was intended, I guess, without prior to modern draft systems. And there's not like, I don't know of anyone. I'm sure people are. I sometimes, I haven't done it in a while, but we used to have Firkin Fridays here. We may start doing that again, just to see if it's kind of a hard sell because the beer is slightly warmer, and then it's served at cellar temperature, which is like 55 Fahrenheit. Most beers served at 36 Fahrenheit, so sometimes it's a hard thing to sell to people that have never had it before. But it's great if you can find actual real ale that someone has finished in a firkin or a pin firkin and served properly.
I think it also allows like a little bit of experimentation, which you could do on more of like, depending upon the volume of the vessel. So pin 5 gallons, or let's say the firkin 10.8, he would be able to like, I'm going to put some like blonde roast coffee and something, or like or like vanilla beans, like true legit, into it, let that finish over the 2 weeks, and then have that flavor impart. So it was kind of an au naturel way for experimentation to go down, as opposed to having like 15 barrels of some orange crazy something, and then you've got 15 barrels of orange crazy something. So
yeah, but traditionally, the only time I ever put anything like vanilla beans and cocoa nibs in a firkin was here. Back in the day, we never did that. That was not. It was like literally, the beer went in, you put in finings and a hot plug, and that's how it was. But because the market has changed so much, you can do that nowadays. Back then, I don't know if we could even sell it. And the reason we were so popular in Northern Virginia is because there was a local chapter for the Campaign for Real Ale called CAMRA. And because real ale was dying out in England, they were switching to regular draft systems, and the English pub culture was dying as a result. And so there was this organization that started to preserve the technique of making and serving real ale. We happen to have a chapter, Northern Virginia, DC chapter. I don't know if there's one down here. I should look at that. I don't think there is, but that was they were a ready market. Like people would call up the breweries, like, "Is it Firkin Friday?" I'm like, "No, it's next Friday," and we would sell it out. That firkin would be dust in 2 hours or less back then.
Yeah, I think it'd be awesome to see a resurgence of the firkin, especially if the ginger and I could make it out there. I would love to try it. I've never had I don't know if I've ever had anything like that before out of a firkin. I've had warm beer certainly, and I love warm beer. I got my own warm beer sitting down in the closet downstairs, but yeah, I just want the experience. It'd be really fun to do.
Like what Jonathan said, I mean, it's that true knowledgeable art on his part to like the way that he was explaining it, years ago now. Years, like you have to find it, so it's just like 1 degree Plato from finish or something like that.
I mean, there's a couple of ways they determine when the beer that's fermenting is ready to go into it. I would do it where it was a 0.5 degree Plato before I thought it would be done, meaning it had a 0.5% of sugar that would still be fermented. Bigger breweries, they do a yeast cell count because they have a lab that they can do that. Well, we didn't have that. And that was a lot of, a lot of the things I was trained in by older brewers was in lieu of having a microbiological program. So I learned anecdotal methods to do stuff like that without having a microscope and more modern instruments. But yeah, there's like I said, I could explain, like, get crazy with the firkins, but it's not something I do regularly anymore. It's only going to be something we do every now and again. And when we do it, we'll advertise it, well in advance, because it is cool. I mean, I put it on the bar and I have this mallet and I tap it and quickly stop the beer from shooting out, and it's served right out of the firkin or pern firkin with gravity.
And there's like a hang time clock. Once it's going, you got to finish this thing, because otherwise, because of the reduced carbonation, I mean, you will have it needs to go. Yeah,
pretty much you got to serve it really best that day, because there's no CO2 pushing it, so it just gets oxidized. Mm-hmm. And so the next day, you could serve it, but not beyond 2 days, it's no good. You got to dump that.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things, like, if we do it again, it'll be a limited time to make sure we don't dump beer, just make sure a 5 or so gallon pin firkin is gone within the day, which is usually the case. There was only one where there was a little left.
Well, I feel like
it's a drawn out procedure, and I'm a one man show in the brew house. So I try to keep a whole variety of beers on tap. So it's usually when I have time, to fill firkins, it's kind of rare these days. So,
and the right beer.
Yeah.
Like not every beer out variety is probably conducive to that.
Makes sense. So no sour milkshake IPAs coming out of the firkins, or?
I mean, you could do nowadays. And there's no rules anymore.
Yeah.
You can do that.
This wasn't sour to begin with, but yes, it is,
Yeah. Well, I think
to do anything like that, that's honestly, that's probably where dry hopping came from. The idea of it was putting hop plugs in barrels and casks and firkins.
Mm-hmm.
I've not made a milkshake IPA, but I'll probably try one. I'll try to make one for certain. It's because back then, like when I was brewing in California, I made a coconut porter, and it was like cutting edge, and it was awesome.
So good.
But nobody, it sold well actually at the brew pub I was working at. But when I took it to the Great American Beer Festival, the people that were so, hemmed in by style guidelines absolutely hated it. I had one guy pour it out in front of me on the floor and he said, "You personally bastardized the style of porter."
Wow.
And that was 1998, right? Was that?
I think it was 99.
99.
Yeah. I don't think we didn't go to the 98. That was 99. So.
Oh, he must hate his life right now with all the new stuff out.
Yeah, but that's how different the market was back then. And so, nowadays, like I said, I really welcome the experimentation. It's very cool, and I've done things that I never would have done. I've added things to beer I never would have done, but still, I try. Like I don't like using extracts. I always try and use real things, to make real actual whatever to make the flavor components. So if it's coconut, it's coconut, chocolate or cocoa nibs and things like that, or puree.
Yes. So I want to come back to the Great American Brew Festival really quick. We read that, speaking of Great American Beer Festival, not Brew Festival, sorry, that you actually beat out Sam Adams in a particular category, which we were quite impressed to hear about. Do you recall what that beer was exactly? And do you do? And you feel like that
Like,
success
that
under your
was,
belt
like,
kind of
I
expired?
was like, I will
Yeah.
never forget that day. That was like, I was totally unexpected, but it was, there were 38 entrants into the category, and it, I think the category was experimental ale, which if I look back at the beers in it, like, man, these are so tame by today's standards that were experimental. And the beer that I put in the category was a pale ale that I had made with puffed amaranth grain. And we had been using indigenous North American grains in the beers at this brewery I worked in California. That was our gimmick. And we put pre-gelatinized wild rice in the red ale. We used flaked maize in the cream ale, which you're supposed to do anyway. That's, you're supposed to use an adjunct like cream or rice, or corn or rice. And the amaranth went in the IPA, and just a little bit. And those were not recipes I developed. There was a corporate brewmaster that developed the recipes, and I made them. I was the head brewer at that point. And then this was new. We were part of a chain on the West Coast, and we were a new brew pub in that chain. And so we opened up with these beers that had these very expensive adjunct ingredients. Pre-gelatinized wild rice is super expensive. It is now, it was then. Amaranth, expensive, which is like why I put like barely any in the beers. And so we had been open for like 2 weeks, and the CEO of the company called me directly, and I had never spoken to this guy before. There was the brewmaster between me and him in the chain of command. I only knew who he was because his name was on the paycheck that I got. And when the bartender came, he was like, "So wants to talk to you." I was like, "Oh, I thought I was getting fired." I was like, "Why is the CEO calling me up?" So I get on the phone, and he's like, "Jonathan, what is going on down there?" He's like, "The cost of these beers are astronomical." He's like, "You got to take all those crazy, weird ingredients out of the beers." So I reformulated all the recipes, but the day before I had placed like a 3-month grain order. So I had purchased all this stuff. So as soon as like I hung up and I realized, oh man, like the order was placed yesterday, I got on the phone with the supplier and they're like, "It's already on the truck, heading your way." So I told the brewmaster, I didn't tell the CEO himself. I'm like, "Hey, this is what happened, and this is what I will not order these again. I've reformulated the recipes, and I'll just use these ingredients in the special." We were allowed to make one specialty beer like a month. We had 5 flagships we had to keep on tap, and one of them could be of my choosing that I made. So to get rid of all this amaranth, it came in like 20 pounds, came in this huge bag because it was popped like popcorn. And my office was also the grain storage room. So it took up like all this space. So I was like, you know what? Let's see what this stuff really tastes like, if it has a flavor contribution. So I put as much in the mash as I possibly could, and hopped it with all Willamette hops, a low pale ale, like I think 25 IBUs, and it was like 6.5% alcohol. And as soon as it like started getting toward the end of the state fermentation, it had this incredible flavor, like apricot in it, and it had no fruit. And I was like, man, that's wild. Like, what is that? And so the beer finished, served. It was great. But in order to, science dictates that it has to be repeatable, the experiment. So I did it again. Same outcome. And I was like, this is the beer I'm sending to the Great American Beer Festival. And it won the gold in that category. Sam Adams didn't place. That year, I think they had this barley wine called the Millennial or Millennium, something like that. It came in this like in a wooden box that was lined with velvet. It was super expensive. But yeah, that was totally unexpected. And that's me.
Nice.
Wow.
Back in 2000, shaking Charlie Papazian's hand, which was awesome because I learned how to homebrew by reading his book, The New Joy of Home Brewing.
Wow,
and so I get off the stage and I take off the medal, and the brewers in the sister chain are like, "No, dude, you wear that all night. And it was like, then we hit the town in Denver and just party with this big gold medal around. It was like the closest I've ever been to like being a rock.
That's awesome.
I've
That's what
actually
Olympians feel like.
trying to price Amaranth to see if I can make it again.
Man,
I'm still looking for something kind of affordable or alternate ways to do it because it's still pretty darn expensive. But I really would like to make a variation of that beer with Amaranth.
I think that leads us into our next question pretty good too.
yeah, definitely. I was going to say we in a recent episode we actually had Sebastian Wolfram from Epiphany Malts in North Carolina on the show, and he talked to us a lot about experimental sort of malts and things like that. And they use all kinds of wild stuff, corn and different things. I couldn't even name half the stuff the stuff that he talked to us about just kind of blew our minds. And Reese and I are pretty much noobs in the space when it comes to the different ingredients and things, and we're trying to learn more and more about this. So you talking about this is great for us. But one of the things we wanted to dig a little bit deeper for you guys is into the ingredients you're using today in the beers that are available at the brewery. So for starters, I'm curious, how do you guys source your ingredients that you're using right now? Is it locally? Are you do you travel to find different ingredients? How does that work?
I mean, I use whatever I can that's local, which is not much right now. The most breweries, there are suppliers in North America that will sell malt hops, and that's where I get my malt and hops from, are these nationwide suppliers. Some of them are international companies. The international one is where I get my European malts and hops from, and the one that's based here in North America is where I get most of my base malt, which is the same base malt I was using back in 1998, because it's great stuff for most of the ales I made. So it's really from all over, and they'll send you samples, so you pick and choose and grade it and try and suss out what it'll taste like in the end. A lot of it is just stuff that I knew from using it years ago, and whatever, sometimes new products come up, and I was like, well, let's give it a shot and see how it is.
It sounds like you have your more safe kind of options that you kind of stick to, and then you also probably have some that you try out, like the Amaranth that you tried out years ago. Was there any way for you to know that, and I think I understand that it was going to taste like apricot?
No, I mean, like sometimes with malt, like we'll chew malt and grain kernels, and generally, depending on the malt, you can kind of get an idea of what the flavor contribution is going to be. This didn't have much flavor at all. It was almost like styrofoam. They're like slightly grainy styrofoam. It didn't even have as strong a flavor as popcorn. But a lot of things that we put in beer, the flavor changes completely when it ferments. Like, I don't know if you've ever homebrewed and tasted wort that was not fermented, but it tastes almost nothing like the finished beer.
Right.
So the same is true with some of these adjuncts we use, malts and hops as well. Hops change a lot. In fact, it's kind of cool. Like nowadays, there's especially with the New England or hazy IPAs, they're actually studying how hops flavors are changed by the yeast, which is something we'd never really considered 20 years ago. And what makes these beers hazy, and interestingly, how these flavor compounds, these terpenes, will convert or into a completely different flavor while they're being fermented.
Yeah, that's.
So I liken that Amaranth must have done something similar to that, where it was, we call bioconversion. and it just changes the flavor completely. So that's why I was shocked. Like at first I was like, thought it was an off flavor. Like, is something wrong? But it was no known off flavor I'd ever been trained to identify. And it was really good.
But reproducible.
Yeah.
So that's the critical aspect.
Can't do it twice. Forget about it. But which is why I did it 3 times before. I made sure. I was like, all right, the second time, like, tasted the same. The third time was the batch that got sent partially to the Great American Beer Festival.
Yeah,
right.
That's one thing that's always like blown my mind is with brewing. I mean, obviously these guys like, Anheuser-Busch and stuff like that, they're doing the same recipe over and over on a large scale. But for these smaller scale breweries, like how you maintain that sort of flavor. I mean, just naming some of the ones here locally, like O'Connor's El Guapo. Like I know what to expect every time I drink that. And I'm just curious, how do you replicate that time after time and maintain a consistency? Because I'm a part of like these different, I think Reese's as well, Facebook groups of Virginia craft beer fans. And for instance, Hardywood's gingerbread stout. Yeah. You'll see people year after year, they're like, yeah, man, gingerbread stout's really good this year. Or like, this year it's like whatever. Like what's your strategy in terms of keeping things consistent year after year?
It's the hardest thing we do as small craft brewers, because the bigger brewers, they can blend out in the cellar. And so they'll, if you're really big, then you brew high gravity beers. And a lot of the brewer's job, particularly the brewmaster, their job is to figure out how to combine proportions of these 2 tanks to always make a certain beer every time. And with us, we can't do that. So the only way you really can do it is you take meticulous notes every time you brew, and of time, of temperature, I don't do it anymore, but I was actually trained to note the weather on my brew sheets. And as I've done research, 19th and early 20th century beers, I've been looking through online brewing ledgers from like 1910. They always put the weather, and the reason we did that, it was because it affected your boil. But I didn't know that they were doing it back then. But that's literally, I don't do it anymore because I don't think it makes too much of a difference. But
I mean, it's akin to like the rally cap or like up the beer during the Stanley Cup. You never know. It's like if this works,
sometimes things don't go according to plan, which is how like the hazy IPA was invented. Like the way they made that beer was a serendipitous thing. It was a mistake, but it was good. And they went back through their notes and be like, this is how we did it. And the way you make them was never be a way we were trained to make beer traditionally, 20 or more years ago. So that's like, I take meticulous notes, times, temperatures. If I got a substitute grain, that gets noted. And that's how you are able to replicate those things on the small scale without being able to blend things out in the cellar.
Yeah, I mean, and it's the skills in the trenches to account for those agricultural differences, because your hop could be the same exact hop name, but it has a different alpha acid or something of that nature, or even 2-roll from this company, or even from the same company. Just different batches will have certain something.
Yeah, every time I get a new lot of hops or malt, I have to look at the analysis, and I will change the recipe in order to make sure it stays consistent. Hops,
right. And
hops definitely, because every time you get a new shipment of hops from a different lot, the alpha acids are way different, and like by a lot. Malt on this scale, not so much. I can change things during the process to make up for that. But if you're brewing on a huge scale, we're using thousands and thousands of per batch of malt, then the brewer needs to look at the moisture content and all these other like glassiness, mealiness, of the proportions of the malt, so that they can change their recipe accordingly to make it the same.
Yeah, we actually,
and even like since we've opened, when we opened, we had 5 varieties that was it on tap, And however, there has been, over year after year, some of those beers have remained on tap ever since the doors have opened. And not only us, but as well as our guests are just like, dude, like this brown ale, this tastes exactly like my first day that I've ever been here. And by all means, it's like, this is probably what the 20th batch of this, or so, and it's just to put it out there. But even that, and with agricultural differences of the constituent ingredients, taken into consideration, but he's able to, the reproducibility, not only in, of the serendipitous, amaranth peach flavor or whatever, even the foundation beers, it's all about the notes, and it's wild to have it. And I guess that kind of answers way back into one of your earlier questions. It's like, well, all of the foundation rock solid beer styles that we do offer, which are a little bit less maybe experimental at first glance than others, but to have that bedrock is massive. And now, like, once, now, like, with his eyes shut and with, like, all of, like, the crazy, supply chain issues potentially, with us being the small fish, like, okay, like, we want maybe Mosaic Citra. We can't get it. Okay, well, then what can we do? So long story short is like, with that rock solid foundation, then that also, dialed in, gives then him the leeway to be like, all right, now I can experiment with something.
Yep.
And now we pull out the Aztec Amber again, or something of that nature. It's good to have that standing, that footing, because where others, like, I've heard some, like, we're more of experimental breweries will like, someone be like, dude, I love that beer is great, and they might never pass their lips again, because it just won't be ever reproduced, and it's in the form that it as. Maybe they'll call it the same thing, like, oh, this is the atom, as some beers out in Portland are, like that's the type of stuff where it's wild.
Yeah, because you guys are also limited by, what the resources that you have available to you as well. You can have your strong foundations, but you're dependent on, those, maltsters and farmers, keeping the product that allows you to do your jobs. So, it's heavily dependent on that. I get it.
Yeah, we actually had we had Sebastian on from Epiphany, but before that, earlier in the show, we had some guys from Pennsylvania who run a hop farm, Lion Vines hop farm, and that's what they told us too. They were like, yeah, we can grow Cascade here on the East Coast, but somebody who grows Cascade out in Seattle, it's completely different, like a completely different flavor profile. Yeah, so
the climate, we call it the terroir.
Terroir, yeah.
The land climate adds to that particular, agricultural product.
The minerals of the soil. Mm-hmm. I mean,
everything.
Volcanic soil will taste different than other, like, loamy soil. It's a lot. The science in that, as far as agriculture.
So, we read about your grandmother's peach pie. We read about the peach cinnamon wheat ale, and you just mentioned a moment ago, I caught it, you said something about peach and apricot together. So I'm wondering, for the peach cinnamon wheat ale, are you using amaranth in that as well? No,
because I haven't been able to find enough amaranth that won't cost like a couple $1,000. So. No, I actually use aseptic fruit purees to add those flavors.
Got it. Okay.
And that's one of the things, like, I do try and do. We don't name our beers. I just call them what they are. Maybe eventually we'll start naming them, but I kind of like probably next week I'm going to be releasing our holiday beer, which is an imperial chocolate cherry oatmeal stout, and that's probably what I'm going to call it.
Nice.
Sure.
It is what it is, you know.
For sure.
But that way, people like know what it is, and that one I used a lot of chocolate, and it's going to get a whole lot of cherry. It's going to be aged on cherry puree. It's a milk stout that I used oatmeal.
That sounds delicious.
Yeah, sign me up.
That sounds like a trip. That sounds like a worthy trip across the water for me.
We did a cherry almond oatmeal stout last year, and that was just, people loved it. And it literally had legitimate marzipan like flavor from the almonds, and the cherry was fantastic, and it was just perfect. I mean, I guess that's another thing where a lot of our guests will come in and they'll be like, oh, like that, cherry almond or chocolate cherry or whatever it is. And, like where other establishments, really Jonathan showcases the beer. That is what is at heart here. I mean, it's like right now, like we have our mango tangerine Kolsch, where, it is nice. But now if somebody came in here thinking like, oh, like I want like a wine cooler and that sounds great. Well, they may be not stoked, because at the heart is a fantastic Kolsch backbone that has the added fantasticness of those the aseptic fruit purees, which really provide just that it's almost like, I guess, tangerine up front, and almost as you exhale, then you get like mango. It's far out how it just changes on the palate. And but yeah, man, it's that. But again, at the root of it is beer. It is always the beer that is like,
But at the same time, when you're going to add these things, they need to be evident. Like there's some nowadays, we're pushing the envelope with adding flavors to beers, but still, like, I try and balance it so that you can tell that there's these flavors in there. It just doesn't overwhelm the beer entirely, because they have to at least deliver. The cherry chocolate's got to deliver. Or else, it's going to be a disappointment. But it's still a beer.
Yeah. And then we get like for otherwise, like in the tap room, we even actually offer a Radler Shandies, where it's like, if you really want that like fruit, kind of like experience, well then, get your beer cocktail. So like what we'll do is we have like a half and half, where like you can choose your own adventure with our flavored Izzy's, like peach, cherry lime, pomegranate, you name whatever I can kind of source at the time. And if really right now our Radler, so like you would pick the Kolsch, and you would, our beer tenders mix it on the spot. And that has also been well received for individuals who are like, I just don't like beer. Well, that's cool. Let's try this. And then like even a lot of the I don't like beer is just a lot of times you just haven't met the right one yet.
Right.
Like that's really what's on. Or like we'll hear often like, oh, I don't like IPAs. It's like, well, you just never really had, not all IPAs at all are created equal. Hell, like even New England IPAs, not every New England IPA is created equal. Not every West Coast IPA is created equal. So, if individuals have had a bad experience, it's like you always never close that door.
Yep.
Always, just give it a shot.
That's like AJ and I. I was never into IPAs, and he wasn't ever really into dark beers, and we kind of started introducing each other to different IPAs and different dark beers. And I think now, are you drinking a dark beer tonight?
No, it actually is an IPA tonight.
Okay.
I've got a fridge full of stouts right now.
Nice.
Just tonight, that's just what I grabbed.
There's a time and a place for everything. That's really what's up. And there's like, even like I think when we first released the first oatmeal stout varietal, like we're just like, should we do it? It's like the dead heat of summer. And Jonathan's like, dude, I got to the ingredients, we got it, and we dropped it. And people like, it's hot, I don't want it. And then they would try it and be like, hell yeah, give me a 20 ounce of that. Like they just, and it went. Yeah, it went quick.
And that's one thing I do is I always keep a porter or stout on year round. They change. I'll make but I always have a dark beer because, I like them, and I think, there are people that appreciate them year round, and sometimes during the summer, nobody makes them anymore. I always make sure we have a porter or stout on. In the summertime, the coconut porter is our big seller.
Nice. So you're still doing the coconut then. That's awesome to hear.
Yeah.
I mean, seasonal rotation. And it's like we are limited to our draft faucets that we have and our fermenters available and cold room storage. But
right now, the oatmeal stout is our dark. And then, by next week, we'll have the Imperial Cherry Chocolate Oatmeal Milk Stout on.
Nice.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to put an extra chalkboard just to.
We'll just use those. It'll be an acronym. I'll have to figure out what it is. Maybe it'll spell something cool. If move the letters around.
Cha-cha.
There's your chance. There's your chance to name your first beer.
Yeah.
I just had Commonwealth's Sticky Buns Imperial Stout, which was pretty wild. It was very, very sweet, like over the top sweet. So I'm excited to try out. I'm going to make a trip across the water to pick up some of that cherry before it's gone.
Nice.
We're getting close here to our hour. I think we may even be a couple minutes over the hour here. We don't want to hold you guys too much. The time goes so fast when we're talking about this, and we really could probably talk all night about this, But one thing I want to kind of rewind back and go to is, your background, Adam, in sustainability and environmental science and things like that is something that it seems like you guys take pride in at Capstan as well. So can you guys give us any specific examples of how that ties into, the brewery today?
I mean, well, for the front of the house, I mean, I approached the tap room from like, even in the build out with like conservation in mind. So like every fixture, I mean, is like, granted, give or take as far as it is, but it's all everything is high efficiency. We have like low flow water, flush everything, water faucets, you name it. I have made sure that a lot of this was in place just to not only, for one, it's just more economic and it's wise, but it definitely helps to, it gives a good vibe for what we have here, and that's pretty huge. Also, I mean, we are all a Baystar certified business, which is like there are some there's a program in our region and maybe up in the northern part of the like Bay Area, but where like if you like, for instance, I had to write it down here, but like there are certain aspects where like we conserve water, we reduce, reuse, recycle. I mean, my staff, like I'm like, crazy picky like I am at home, where I'm just like, this isn't trash, we for better for worse, does it really matter? Well, it matters to me, and the staff have taken it upon themselves where like we actually do recycle quite a lot of our the waste stream that we produce, and it's a good thing, even to the point when our new landlord, who's awesome, but he took away our recycle bin. So like now I just load up my 4Runner once a week and just like, I'm like, all right, well, I'll take it, because it's just, it's not that difficult to do, but I think makes a difference and an impact. Right. But as well as like, we properly handle and dispose of hazardous waste. But in particular, Jonathan is a main focus as well of being a Baystar certified business, where like he has to take all of his like the effluents and like making sure that all of the chemicals are neutralized before they go down the drain.
Yeah, the production side has almost no waste. I mean, like I have a machine where I recapture the chemicals that I use, and I reuse them when I can, and then neutralize them, and I use them. I dump very little down the drain. And all the spent grain made from brewing the beer goes to a local farmer. So that awesome. Doesn't get thrown out either.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that actually.
I mean, he's got pigs, cows, chickens. Mm-hmm. If some of the grain starts to mold, they just till it into their garden. Yeah. So I mean, there's not a speck of it that they let go to waste. I mean, it's pretty great. So yeah, I mean, like that's. Little bits of changes, like little impacts you would not realize how far they really go and
Right.
making a difference.
Yeah, that's one thing, with microbreweries or craft breweries, whatever you want to call them. They seem like the ones that we've talked to so far put a big emphasis on that. And even, I told you guys I'm from Lexington, Virginia, and I'm sure, everyone's familiar with Devil's Backbone at this point, but they've got a what do they call it, an outpost or something in Lexington, but they brew a lot of stuff. So all the water that they use for their beer comes from Rockbridge County, where I'm from. And the spent grain also goes back to those farmers, in that area. So if I'm drinking Devil's Backbone here, I'm actually supporting, the environment in my hometown, which is pretty cool. It's pretty cool to think about. So that's really cool that you guys are doing that. But I feel like, we're pretty close to our time here. And, before we close out, this has been a lot of fun, guys. I really appreciate you spending your time and hanging out with us this late at night. I know you guys have stuff going on, some bingo potentially to get to. But before we close out, is there anything on the horizon for Capstan? Without giving away any top secret plans, you kind of told us already about your Imperial Stout. Anything else that the folks out there should be looking forward to?
Yeah, I mean, other than the fantastic, new styles or curveballs that Jonathan could throw at any particular time. I mean, we have been pre-COVID. We signed the lease on the next door unit, and we were planning on a little bit of a taproom expansion into that next door. So I mean, that's still in the cards. It's just the time frame has been adjusted. The goalposts have moved because just the impact to business. But we that's still out there. We have like apartment units that once you do come on up here, like we are off the beaten path, but well worth finding. And we also now have like these luxury apartments where you could like throw a rock at us. So like those are coming. So like, and
That's awesome.
I think one of the units, I think there's 4 main buildings. One of them's already rented. So like that's pretty chill. Cause I mean, you could like slither on over to us. I mean, that's how close they are. So really, that's the main thing without giving too much away is that, we're here, well worth finding. And, the styles are historically legitimately fantastic. The experimentation ones have been well received, and it's just you never know what we have up our sleeves from great events, great beer, and once you walk through the door, you're gonna be like, oh, far out, like there's a good vibe here,
Yeah,
and that's it's all encompassing and all important. So
yeah, well, I would definitely feel good about knowing that the experience you guys have had, just talking to you guys in this short hour. You've literally been all over the country and have influences from all across the, around the globe. And your backgrounds, have brought you to this one place in time. And all those influences are in that one single brewery. So I'm excited to stop by and check you guys out and meet you guys face to face, obviously.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm right there too. I want to do the same thing. It sounds like just, the sustainability that you guys have, the traditional styles that you guys have, all the history that you have, in the business, everything that you're kind of bringing to it is just really interesting. And I'm sold on it. I got to make a trip. I got to come try it out. So, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, please do. We would welcome you both.
Cool. Well, AJ, I don't think we got anything else, right?
Yeah, man, you want to take us out?
Yeah. So everybody listening, if you're local to Hampton Roads or just passing through, make sure to check out Capstan Bar Brewing in Hampton, Virginia. Pick up a 4-pack of 16-ounce cans on demand, mixed and matched to your liking. Also, if you want to learn more about Capstan Bar Brewing and see what they are pouring, head to capstanbarbrewing.com or check them out on Instagram at Capstan Bar Brewing.
Yeah, definitely, guys. Make sure you check them out. And Adam and Jonathan, thank you guys again so much for coming on the show. It was awesome to learn about your backgrounds and more about the brewery. And like I said many times, I'm excited to make my way up there. And Reese and I will have to converge our paths and meet in the middle in Hampton. I think you have a little bit further to drive than I do.
Yeah.
But
It's okay.
we'll make it happen so we can meet you guys in real life. So again, thank you guys so much, and And thank you all. Yeah, anytime, man. Anytime you want to come back and talk to us more about the firkins and things like that, we're excited to nerd out on that kind
You
of
don't know
stuff.
what you're about to, get him going.
It's the rabbit hole.
That's what's up.
That's what we want.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Nice.
That's what we want.
Knowledge.
That's what the people want. The
Nice.
people want the details.
Yep.
But for all you guys listening out there, thank you again for joining us. And again, make sure you check out Capstan Bar Brewing. But until then, we'll catch you guys in the next episode.
See ya.
See ya.
Take care. Thank you.